Hi.
Hello.
This is the first time I've ever been in a city council meeting, and it's been quite an experience. I'm with Walkupy, the walking occupation. We started in Zuccotti Park November 9th. We've been marching to NYC to D.C. From D.C. we left December 1st, and we've been marching. We're headed towards Atlanta here. And we're just standing in solidarity with Occupy Charlotte. And the biggest concern for me personally is just the vagueness in all the language. And I'm just going to give you an example of what happens when you have vagueness in language, and how when you give the authority to people that don't necessarily understand what's happening here in a city council meeting, what happens when you have vagueness of language. As we were marching in from Winston-Salem, it took 3 days to get into Charlotte. As we were marching into Charlotte, it was about 6 o'clock p.m., and we were about 2 blocks away from 600 East Trade Street when we stopped and waited for the rest of Occupy Charlotte to meet us. We did not happen to know that we were standing in front of Bank of America corporate headquarters. We did not know that. However, when we were taking a look at a mural, several police officers and security officers who, under vague language, surrounded us and pushed us away from this brick 3 feet from the window. Had we had known that that was Bank of America's corporate headquarters, we would not have been intentionally in their way. However, with vague language, what happens is it gives the authority to people that aren't here, that don't care as much as city council members may, to take actions that will severely hinder people's First Amendment rights. And that's what happened that evening. Was after they pushed us away 3 feet, it was just an act of nonviolent civil disobedience to stand in front and say, no, this is our First Amendment right to stand here peacefully. And Garth Kaiser was arrested, and so was Sarah Handyside. They were both arrested because of vague language. And people say that Occupy Wall Street or Occupy encampments are not saying anything. And then I overheard one person say that, just camping, just being out there, holding a sign, not even saying anything, is an act of freedom of speech. 80% of language is nonverbal. It's the things that we don't say. And just in honor of that, I have 30 seconds left. I just want to have a moment of silence for Sarah Handyside and Garth Kaiser.
Hudson.
Good evening, Mayor. Good evening, Council. My name is Lyndon Hudson. I'm an Iraq War veteran. I'm also with Walkupy, and the problem I see with this ordinance is I just see it as another form of taking away and oppressing our freedom of speech. I am not happy with the system the way it is. Everything, from the time that I started going to school, and everything I learned is quite contrary to what our country is actually doing now and what I have witnessed. Okay? I have been over there in the waters of the Arabian Gulf. Before me, I see an open ocean. Behind me, I see oil platforms. I stood there wondering, what am I doing there? And I still wonder what is going on in this country. Everyone I talk to, they're not happy with our government. They're not happy with what's going on in our political system. And I see these people, I'm here for all of them. I'm here for their freedom of speech. And they're addressing their grievances, and they're getting assaulted for it and beaten down. I got beaten down by a police officer for standing up for their freedom of speech, protecting college students in Boston. I got a scar on my hand for the rest of my life. That's all I have to say. Thank you.
Craig Glisson. Edith Garwood.
Good evening. My name is Edith Garwood. I'm not going to go through a lot of what I said because I couldn't say it half as well as the people before me said it. But I did come down here tonight and left my family with soup on the stove because I had to stand here just in support of the Tea Party, in support of the Occupy movement, in support of myself and for you guys. And I'll just mention a couple of things that I jotted down that I don't think people have mentioned yet and might be a little positive way of looking at this. Times Person of the Year is the protester. This isn't just the protester overseas, but here in our own backyard. Those protesters were inspired in part by our own long-held democratic values of freedom of speech, association, and due process. I just find it ironic that as people are losing their lives overseas in the struggle to gain basic freedoms espoused by us as fundamental democratic values, that cities here in the U.S. are actually throwing up impediments to these very rights for their own citizens. Now, there are cities across the country facing the same concerns as Charlotte when it comes to the Occupy movement and other protests, but they haven't passed resolutions with impediments for freedom of speech, but they've actually passed resolutions in support. Irvine, California was mentioned earlier, and cities and other towns across California have also passed resolutions in support of the Occupy movement. Los Angeles, the second largest city in the U.S., passed a resolution that said it would stand in support for the continuation of the peaceful and vibrant exercise in First Amendment rights carried out by Occupy Los Angeles, quote, unquote. Seattle, Washington, the 9-member city council resolved to support the Occupy Seattle protests. They stressed that while condemning any act taken by protesters that would interfere with police, they would actively take steps to address the concerns. Quote, unquote, the city will review its banking and investment practices to ensure that public funds are invested in responsible financial institutions that support our community. Pittsburgh, Chicago, Cleveland passed a resolution supporting the Occupy movement, saying that they recognize and support the principles of the Occupy movement and the peaceful and lawful exercise of the First Amendment as a cherished and fundamental right in the effort to seek solutions for economically distressed Americans at the federal, state, and local levels. It would also minimize economic insecurity. They were requesting, the City Council was requesting in the resolution that the concerns be forwarded to congressional leaders and President Obama. Okay. The City of Charlotte should not be afraid of protesters or occupiers with the upcoming DNC, but be proud of the fact that it was citizens from Mecklenburg County that were brave enough to pass the first resolutions in 1775 that paved the way for the Declaration of Independence.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Charlie Schmidt, then Kiki Hancock, and then Judson Abraham. Yes, sir.
Good evening, Mayor, City Council members. My name is Charlie Schmidt. I'm a member of the Civil Rights Clinic at the Charlotte School of Law. We've been working closely with the ACLU and the National Lawyers Guild to monitor especially anti-camping ordinances around the state and around the region. And we feel we have some concerns with these proposed laws. Specifically, as you know, First Amendment is a fundamental right. Therefore, courts look at any sort of regulations upon it with strict scrutiny, not wanting those ordinances to be overbroad or vague, as many of the people have stated here. Again, the sections in dealing with the pitching of tents, having animals at a protest, having any sort of mask, bike locks, helmets. These things tend to be overbroad. The language is very vague, as we discussed. And previous speakers have discussed, it's left to the intent, an intent that is to be determined by police. So if a family comes to a protest or comes to a march or a demonstration, there's a kid on a bike with a helmet, the same sort of scenario plays out that others have pointed out. These laws can be interpreted to say, I cannot show up at a protest with my helmet, on my bike, with a backpack, which I am frequently around town doing, going back and forth to school. The fact that these instigating a lottery system, and again, the appeals process, as it's written within this ordinance, it says that if a permit is denied, that the appeals process is internal. It seems very vague in how that, I believe it mentions a quasi-judicial board or some sort of review board, but it doesn't really explain what that means. It also, there could be too much control within one or two city officials, such as the city manager or the chief of police. And I know that the North Carolina Court of Appeals has very recently looked at other ordinances and permitting process, and when you limit it or put control into the hands of one or two officials, you can run afoul of the fundamental rights and the protections that are afforded there. That bringing up the point of, again, the retroactive nature of this. Other cities and other challenges to this have looked at the problems with applying this retroactively. In other words, Occupy protesters and others already being on site and having that now be retroactively unlawful behavior. I know my time's running out. What we will be doing with the Civil Rights Clinic is we will be putting our issues into a formal memo and submitting them to City Council. And we welcome any sort of questions and issues y'all may have.
Thank you very much. Kiki Hancock.
We have a guy who keeps turning place. It's a good job.
Welcome, sir.
Council members, I want to say that I admire your cleverness in this ordinance, but I do not think that you've really considered what the consequences of this ordinance will be. As you probably know, Obama's record has been a dismal one. We have free trade agreements he's trying to pass, and in some cases has. We have record deportations, we have drone strikes, and we have numerous other problems with his neoliberal austerity agenda. And as you know, as a result of this, during the DNC, many progressives, probably thousands, are going to come and want to challenge him from the left to try to say that this is not really a progressive administration. So you have come up with this scary ordinance with language about gas masks and knives and chains and tripods to ahead of time try to plant this scary image of protesters in the public's mind so that we have this image of all these protesters that they're going to be extremist, violent hoodlums, as the word that's been used previously tonight. But I'm afraid that if you really provoke people this way, this bill isn't going to have order. It's going to result in a self-fulfilling prophecy. Because if you break up Occupy Charlotte, you're doing nothing but breaking up the best way to contain the quote-unquote hoodlums, because the Occupy General Assembly is all about consensus. It's about being organized so that we can act as a group. And if you disengage this, it's going to be disorder, and you're just going to provoke chaos. You're going to give the hoodlums more leeway if they don't have their fellow activists to try to contain them and make them act more rationally. If you pass this bill, if you pass this blatant act of harassment and provocation, you're going to get Seattle 99. So I propose you do something else, a little different, if you really want to restrict a protest. You do what the United Arab Emirates does whenever there is an IFI meeting to prevent anti-globalization protesters from coming, which is they just flatly ban all such protests. The only problem with such a provision would be that we're technically supposed to be a democracy. I now yield the rest of my time to Scotty.
Sorry. Mr. Hageman, I have a ruling on that. Excuse me, 1 second.
Your rules don't provide for yielding time in a public hearing.
Okay. I'm
It
sorry.
does say that on your website, so you need to switch your website.
Thank you. Thank you.
I have more to say, a lot more to say.
So do I.